Okay, in this video I will be going over how to draw a mountain. So this is the third video in this series of how to draw realistically. And what you want to do is watch the first video in this series, which will go over in much greater detail the techniques and tricks and advice to better be able to draw really anything realistically, but with this video we're specifically dealing with how to draw a mountain. So one of the things you'll want to, I guess, pay attention to if you're first starting out is choosing a reference photo. This photo of a mountain is really, in my opinion at least, much more easy. It's a lot easier than choosing a photo of, like, say, a human face, which we're also used to looking at. With this particular reference photo of a mountain, you're going to be able to make more mistakes, and it'll be a lot more forgiving than, say, drawing a human, drawing especially like eyes, because we're also used to looking at eyes. But with a reference photo like this and a mountain, you're really just trying to get the basics down. You're trying to get those shadows. As you can tell, there's three triangular shaped peaks that we're going to try to get. And by all means, you know, I'm going to try to draw what I'm seeing realistically. But it's one of those reference photos that you can really go off and expand on it and kind of make the drawing your own, because no one really is going to be able to, unless they have the reference photo after you're done with the drawing, say to you, you know, this just doesn't look right. As long as you're adhering to the basics, basic form, basic values with the shadow in the reference photo of the mountain, people will be able to tell, okay, this is a mountain. You know, you've got the shadows in the right place, there's peaks. So this is a really great way to practice realism drawing, because it completely, in my opinion, does away with the frustration factor. When you're drawing, I think a lot of people get discouraged, and they oftentimes do not finish a drawing. And it's because they're trying to draw something a little bit too difficult at first, and such as a car or a person. But with this, it's such a ambiguous, almost abstract reference photo, and yet we all know what it is when we see it. But you can see that what I'm drawing, it's not exactly what the reference photo as far as the angles and measurements, but it's getting the basic gist of what that mountain is trying to convey with the shape and the scale, and later on the shadows. So the other thing, which I mentioned in the other videos, is to print out your reference photo in the exact same scale that you're going to be drawing it in. So you don't want to print out a 2-inch by 2-inch photo and try to draw a 2-foot by 2-foot. Now, of course, that's a really good exercise for an intermediate or advanced artist, but when you're first starting out, like I say, you want to cut down on that frustration factor of not being able to, at least in your opinion, successfully execute a drawing of what you're looking at. So with this, I've got it printed out, and it's the exact same scale. The other thing is it couldn't be any closer to the actual drawing. It's extremely close, so your eye doesn't have to move very far. You can see with these red lines, it's just showing the measurement that it's not quite perfect, but it's in the ballpark of what I'm drawing, or what the choices I'm making as far as the measurements. You can see here that middle peak is essentially like half of the length of that taller peak, and then you can see that my measurements are not totally exact, but I'm getting the general impression or general measurement of what that reference photo is conveying. So just trying to map out the top ridge there. We'll get into the shading and creating those shadows, and which really is what creates the depth. Is you've got that single pointed light source, and we're going to try to create a copy of that. So here you've got, basic angles, again, not exact from the reference photo, but it's very close to like a 45-degree angle. And I'm trying to mimic these shadows. This is as far as drawing a mountain would probably be the most important part, is having these shadows. Because of that one pointed sun lighting source, you've got these shadows, and this is really what's going to create the depth that you see when drawing a mountain. So trying to create that middle ridge on the middle of the mountain, putting in some value, and really see what these little tiny details I'm making. It's not exact, but someone, even at this stage, I'm going to try to incorporate that little snow cap there. But even at this stage, someone looking at it without looking at the reference photo would be able to say, okay, that's a mountain. He's got these peaks. So not trying to let people, off the hook as far as realism drawing, if that's what your goal is, to draw exactly what you see. But it's just with this type of a choice in a reference photo, it's a lot more forgiving than, say, choosing an animal or obviously the face of a person. So it really allows you to as well expand on your artistic interpretation of being able to make the drawing your own. What I'm doing here is kind of smudging that graphite with my finger and trying to convey those clouds that are in the sky there. So, and again, I'm not being exact really in the slightest. I'm going to put that cloud where I see the other cloud, but it's really going to be just the idea of clouds in the sky next to the mountain there. So smudging in some good looking clouds there. Of course, you can use your pencil to try to convey this sort of softer cloud impression, but this is just a really good technique of smudging. You're taking some of that graphite and trying to create the look of clouds. It's also a great way to do some blending, do some shading, is smudging the graphite with your finger. So putting in more of the detail of that main peak, kind of fleshing everything out. And it really, in my opinion, kind of adds to the enjoyment or the fun of everything if you're not so concerned with perfect detail. What I did over there is I blurred the left side of the screen on purpose, blurred the reference photo, because one of the techniques I talk about in the first video is to blur your vision on purpose occasionally by squinting. You get your eyelashes in front of your eyes, and it kind of blurs your vision. And what this does is it allows your brain to see your reference photo in a completely different way. It allows it to see your photo in basic shapes. You can see this sort of line going down the middle of the mountain there, kind of conveying where that main shadow that goes towards the right starts. So it's a really, and you can see the other shadow right there. It's a really good way of getting your brain away from the thought that you're drawing a mountain, and maybe adhering to the fact that you're drawing, in a way, basic shapes and values, darks and light areas, and it's just a really good way to kind of break your way of thinking and expanding in a way that will allow you to apply detail in potentially a much more accurate way to blur your vision on purpose. It's something you really need to practice, though. So there you've got the third installment of how to draw realistically, tips and tricks. And yeah, go on the internet, find a good reference photo and at a website where you're allowed to use photos and be able to expand on them with your artistic expression. I'll try to leave a link in the bottom to a couple of sites that allow you to do this, but this is just a great way to practice realism, because you can't get frustrated when you're drawing such a thing as a mountain, because there are some basic right and wrong answers, as far as like, you got to have that peak, it's got to look a little bit like a triangle, you got to have a couple other peaks. But I really could have taken the concept of those peaks and put another peak, or 3 more peaks, or I could have removed a peak, and really somebody looking at the drawing later would not really be able to say, hey, this doesn't look right, unless they're looking at the reference photo. Whereas you cannot really do that with looking at a human being and using a photo of a person as a reference photo. So give this a try. Be sure and check out that first video, which will go over the techniques in much greater detail. And hopefully there will be another video in the future, and be sure and check that out. Thanks for watching.